there's people that don't know who you are, but you're the attorney for the family of Don Lewis. Your name's Clark Brewster. How long have you been practicing law?
39 years.
39 years.
Yeah, it's hard to say that, but that's long as it's been. Like, well,
So, what areas of law do you practice? Or
I'm primarily a trial lawyer that focuses on complex civil litigation, catastrophic injury, wrongful death, and then some high profile criminal cases across the country that I've been involved in over the years.
are you working on any high profile cases right now?
I would say yes. I would consider them fairly high profile. A few of them representing a senator in Wisconsin, and then an indictment up there, Representative Stormy Daniels, of course, against uh, our former president. Before,
Yeah, is he gonna? Well, he'll have to leave the office eventually. They've already ran him out. But so what? You've done criminal defense, so you know how the criminal court system works.
yes, yes, I have a pretty good foundation in that area.
And then civil litigation. What kind of stuff does that entail?
Well, that involves representing a party to litigation. In my instance, it's usually the plaintiff involved in either a catastrophic injury or death, representing a family, or alternatively, it could be a complex civil case involving, could be oil and gas, could be other complex industry, but just a variety of those. But they're usually cases that have high stakes and are heavily litigated and ultimately tried in front of a jury.
Have you had any big cases against some of these big oil companies?
Oh yes, we've had a number of national type cases over the years, not just oil companies, but involving a lot of you know interesting uh, industries and cases. I don't want to get real specific, but if you
Right.
will, but
I already knew the answer to that. I know you've gone up against some of these powerful oil companies and you've done really well for your clients. I know you have people coming over. It's New Year's Eve. I appreciate you being on here.
no problem.
Uh, I just want to ask you some questions because you and I have spent some time together.
Right.
For those that don't know, um, that if for some reason people watching on YouTube right now, if you don't know, I've gone to Clark's office a few times. I've discussed information with him regarding this case that we've all been working on. There's a probably a couple hundred people watching that have worked on this case with me over the last 9 months now. It's going on 9 months, but I got some questions and I actually wrote them down. I never do that. I never like I just don't do it. But I want to ask you some questions. I don't know if you can answer them or not. These are questions that people ask me. One of them is this, Don Lewis went missing over 23 years ago. And as far as an investigation by law enforcement, I don't think there was a serious investigation done. What do you think it would take to get law enforcement to investigate Don's disappearance, to like a legitimate investigation? What do you think it would take?
Well, what really threw them off in their defense is the fact that they were investigating a disappearance, someone that just left the country. Apparently, that's what they were told, or just disappeared over the ocean instead of truly what it was, which is probably more likely a murder. And had they investigated it from the outset as a likely homicide, I think we would have a much different circumstance than we have today. And until law enforcement recognizes this is a likely homicide and takes that very seriously, uh, uh, they're probably not going to go anywhere. So the disappearance itself was had to have been thought through very, very carefully, and the backstory fed very carefully and dishonestly. That caused law enforcement just to wait to see if he'd show up.
Mm-hmm.
It took years, and that created a huge deficit for law enforcement to move forward. But once they realized, and I think hopefully it can be brought in a way in which some serious, genuinely interested law enforcement agency, whether that be the FBI or that be the Florida Bureau of Investigation, or that involve the sheriff's department, or even the police in that vicinity, once they realize that this is a likely homicide, the thing they should do is start putting people under oath in front of a grand jury, start subpoenaing documents, and forcing people that know they were probably involved in the homicide to take the Fifth Amendment. We'd see a much different circumstance if they put that machinery in motion.
Well, what about, because it's been so long, over 23 years, what about statute of limitations and, you know, for people that could have harmed Don? Like, what about statute of limitations?
Well, the statute of limitations is a serious issue at this point because there's a number of crimes that probably could have been prosecuted, could have been used to charge lesser involved people in a position where they may have been cooperative in their testimony, and those matters are lost, and so that leverage is lost. However, if they conducted an investigation and people started lying under oath, committing perjury, that statute would just start as soon as the perjury occurred. Murder, of course, does not have a statute of limitations, but there's a number of, they've lost ground on that, and the statutes run on some of the peripheral charges that they could have used for accomplices, or maybe even some of the principals if there's more than one.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to say in my opinion, I think there's more than one. But speaking, I mean,
the thing that struck me, Jack, and I've expressed this to you, is you really look at somebody's culpability based upon whether they're telling things just out of confusion or misunderstanding or being misled by others, and you say, well, this person truly is genuinely trying to get to the truth, and she's telling, or he's telling us what he knows at the time. But from the outset, as you and I both know, the story about him leaving that small airport he hadn't been to in years with a plane that suddenly nobody even knew about, didn't have any kind of tracking on it, no kind of registration, no kind of where did he purchase it, where did he get the fuel, none of that. That was a story that was a subterfuge, no question. So if you start there, you realize that authorities were lied to very directly. And that's what causes me to believe that this certainly wasn't a mere disappearance.
Yeah, of all of this, all of the things that, like the facts, because there's a lot of them that there's only a handful of people that know some of this stuff, but you're one of them. I mean, we have looked through a lot of files and factual evidence, but what's the biggest thing that stands out to you of all the things that we've gone through, like, or that you know of? I mean, it might be something that I don't know of that you've seen.
Well, the thing that really struck me, and I think I articulated it to you when we were looking each other in the eye in Florida, is the whole story about the little airport that we drove out to, and the idea that this vehicle was found out there, and somehow this mysterious plane was flown and lost over the ocean. That was just complete garbage. It could not have happened, as we saw. I mean, it couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that someone would tell that story at the time, to me, indicates that they were being completely untruthful. And if you're being untruthful, there's got to be a reason for that. It's misfuse and diffuse, the circumstances. So that to me, that's where if I had any question about whether this was a innocent kind of disappearance by an unfortunate person that overestimated his ability to fly a plane or whatever was it, I knew then that that wasn't the case, and the person telling the story had not conflated, but actually uh, deceived, and so there's a reason for that deception.
Right. And when we went out to that airport, I think we were there maybe for 5 minutes. And I mean, it didn't take very long. And you looked around and you knew right away that it just wouldn't be feasible. I mean, it's like a little small airport. How many, when we were, there was like
That's
7 or 8 planes when we were there?
all covered with tarpaulins, many of them not functional. Nobody there at even around,
Right.
and the circumstances were the same in '97. So I really do think that, and the fact that his vehicle was driven out there indicates to me that more than one person obviously was involved. And this was a way to mislead. And guess what? It was effective.
It did mislead. Do you think it was odd that that van was driven back, and when law enforcement went back like 3 days later, there were no fingerprints on the van? Does that seem odd?
Well, that's obviously consistent with some deception, if that's true. Now,
Hmm.
so
If it's true.
look at something, and you and I both had discussions about this, and somebody says, "Look, we checked and there was no fingerprints." I have to accept that as being possibly true and likely true, but I just take that as another indicator, but I don't lock that down as a premise. What I do take as a premise is the impossibility of this guy driving to that airport and getting in a plane that nobody knew he had, when he had no relationship with that airport for years and had a fight with them some years earlier. And the fact that he would get in that airplane and try to fly it to Costa Rica or even Miami is preposterous. That didn't happen. There's no such plane. There was no way that story was true. What is problematic is that was bought into by local law enforcement, and they were kind of waiting for when Don would show up or be found in the ocean or when the plane would wash up or something, and that took years before anyone really thought, well, maybe that's not true. But then
Hmm.
really truly investigated after that. If the federal agents would have come in and conducted an investigation, and she would have, whoever was telling the story, told something that wasn't true, that in and of itself would be a crime. You can't lie to a federal agent. Now you can lie to a state agent in most states, check Florida, but you can't lie to a federal agent. It's a crime if you're caught in doing that. So in this instance, uh, the thing that you and I both also know, and this is the thing that is really troubling, we have higher grades of crimes when somebody's life is taken, as to whether that's manslaughter, DUI, or whether somebody is mad at, a suitor of his wife and he goes nuts and he kills him. That could be manslaughter. But when there's a calculated effort to have someone killed, and it's days and weeks or months in planning, that
Hmm.
is cold, calculated murder. In this instance, his death was, uh, you know, occurring at the time when he was going to go to Costa Rica, and the plan, and people knew. So there had to have been, if his life was taken, which I believe it was, a fair amount of
Hmm.
diabolical planning, and more than one person, without a doubt.
Yeah, this was not a heat of passion type
No,
cr- crime. It was
and the
planned out.
reason we know it was not is because of his plan to go to Costa Rica, his plan to ship some cars down there, his plan that the timing, the tickets, and that kind of thing, and who he is telling it through days out or weeks out.
Yeah.
That the opportunity to make sure he vanished.
Yeah, because there's someone coming on after you that spoke to Don just a few days before he went missing, and what Don told them is very interesting. But let me ask you one more question, because I know you have people
You're fine.
coming over.
You're fine.
Um, what is the greatest risk to Carol, which could lead to her being charged?
Well, the greatest risk would be if law enforcement, prosecution authorities decided to have a grand jury and bring witnesses in, including her, and see how she may lawyer up and take the Fifth Amendment or refuse to testify, or whether she goes and makes statements that are untrue, which would be perjury that can be proven. Hopefully, with the facts that we know, that's the greatest risk, is the pressure of really putting her in a spot where if she commits perjury, she can be prosecuted for it, or whether other witnesses that come forward and testify incriminate her in such a way where the indictment looks like it's a solid shot to occur. So that's the greatest risk. But one thing that you and I both know, in addition to what we see as deception related to his disappearance, death actually, uh,
Mm-hmm.
is the series of just prolific dishonesty. And I'm not just talking about her saying something to somebody that somebody says isn't true, but we're seeing documents. We're seeing actions taken. We're seeing statements made that are completely, we know, are provably untrue in connection with transactions and real estate matters and backdating of documents. There's a series of a continued cascade of dishonesty that I think in its full glory would cause any prosecutor to really take a serious look at what happened to Don and take action upon it.
When you say, of course, I know the people watching. I know a lot of them know about some of the backdating stuff because early on, when I first started doing videos, um, we had people figuring out things were dated before notary stamps were even in effect. So it appears that it would have had to have been backdated. But let's say that there's a bunch of documents that are forged. How does that help? How does that help solve what happened to Don Lewis? Because people send me tons of documents. Are like, this is not so and so's signature. This is not my signature. And there's a lot of them that where people witnesses
Well,
come forward. But
Jeff, you and I both know. So what I've done in some regard is gone back and got all of the documents with regard to certain tracts of land and traced them all the way forward to see all of the players in their full bloom with regard to how she transferred properties, executed mortgages and releases, and those kinds of things. And we're seeing not just irregularities, but there's no other explanation than deception and,
mm-hmm.
in my opinion, fraud. So you say, how does that work with regard to Don? Well, around at and near that time, as you know, leading up to 1997, we see these irregularities, and then subsequent to them, we see them as well. And while you've got the fact that she's being, I think these documents will be able to show that she was dishonest, and also I think these documents will show a motive for any actions to taking against Don. I think that there's evidence to show that she would have had a motive, and she had a modus operandi truly in some of the deception that we have already rooted out. There's
Mm-hmm.
more of it. It seemed like every corner we looked in, honestly,
I know
it's extraordinary.
it really is because it just seems like every time we go look someplace else, there's something else right there. I'm just
Yeah.
like, it's all
And
over.
and you know this as well. I'll just say this. This is not just some gut feel or some kind of intuition about somebody not telling the truth. These are documents that there's
Mm-hmm.
no other explanation.
Right. Yeah, there is no other explanation.
Correct.
really isn't. So, yeah. Well, I've got this. I could, as you know, I could talk to you for hours and hours and listen to you talk about case law and all this other stuff. But I know you got people there. I'm just going to ask people that are watching if anybody's got a question for Clark. Ask real quick. I'll see if anyone's got any good questions in here
If I
before.
can I add one more thing,
You
Jack?
can add as many as you want. You bet.
Okay. So when we first met and I looked at this a bit, I was very, and I want to say this sincerely, genuinely, very impressed with the work effort, the diligence you put into trying to understand what happened. I, you really you want to always in the back of your mind think about, well, maybe this isn't the circumstance. Maybe there's more to a story that would give you a different backdrop. When we went to Florida and I asked to go to every bit of the locations, and
Mm-hmm.
that to really lay eyes on it, to get an understanding, the distances and that kind of thing, I became pretty convicted or convinced that this was a homicide. And then the third thing, the trifecta, is to meet Don's family. What a tremendous family that deserves our help. And so those are the motivating factors for me.
Yeah. The family is amazing. They are wonderful people,
Yeah.
and they need a lot of help.
They're delightful.
It's
They're not only deserving, but as you know, they're just delightful people, and we enjoy being in their company, and they're genuine.
mhm.
So,
Yeah. Matter of fact, one of them I see Donna's in the chat right
oh,
now, watching. So I don't know how long she's been watching, but I'm sure they're all watching. But I just saw Donna. I'm trying to see if some of these questions are going so fast. I don't know if. Okay, here's one. Carol puts out these daily diaries on her YouTube channel where she supposedly, this is stuff she wrote back in 1995, 96, 97. Um, do you have a take on that? Do you?
I don't really. I hate to tell you this, but I don't really pay attention to that noise. Um, uh, I wouldn't. If she told me my house was on fire and I saw flames, I'd double check. Okay. So I don't pay a lot of attention to what she has to say. She seems to be just a narcissistic, clearly attention-seeking person that is even willing to jeopardize her own reputation and maybe her own liberty as long as she can get more attention. I mean, and
It's
that's a fact. And the second thing that's very clear is she has a higher level of intellect, uh, a high IQ, and it's really pointed, in my opinion, to not only self-preservation but aggrandization as well.
yeah, she is smart. There's no doubt she's smart. She's very smart. Uh, I'm just looking at. All right, so there's a lot of people thanking you and asking what can they do to help, because there's a lot of people that want to help, but there's a lot of them asking, how can we help?
Well, I don't want you, I've told you this as well. I don't want this to be a futile effort. I want to see this through because Don's family really deserves this. And the conduct that I believe took place needs to be find some accountability. So we need to not let up, and any kind of help that can be provided with regard to, and there's been a tremendous amount already with regard to connections or chronologies or dealing with statements that she might have made that we can clearly show to be untrue. We've seen a lot of that, but that's always welcomed.
Okay. All right. Well, I can handle that in the Facebook group that we have. And I appreciate you coming on here. I really do.
My pleasure. Anytime I have an opportunity to speak with you, I enjoy it. I mean that.
I'll get that check out to you for saying that. I'm
Thank
kidding. All right. Hey, thanks a lot, Clark.
you.
Everybody, say goodbye to Clark. He's got company that is over at his place, but he took time out to come and chat with us. So I know they appreciate it. And I will talk to you later. I'll talk to you next year.
All right, my friend. Good deal.
All right. See you, Clark. Bye-bye. I'm going to have to go.